Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on your time zone. Welcome to the session, Creating Artificial Intelligence Portals and Pathways for Greater Accessibility for Students with Disabilities and Shared Diversity Empowerment. I am Dr. Linda Asher, co-editor of the International Journal of Open Educational Resources and the chair for this session. Before we begin, please remember to mute your microphones to avoid background noise. We may or may not have time for questions at the end of this particular presentation, but feel free to share your thoughts and questions in the chat box, and we will see how our time goes. It is an honor to introduce our presenter, Dr. Bob Barrett. Dr. Barrett has a doctorate in human resource development from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. His research interests are many, and they include online learning, artificial intelligence, disabilities, teacher training, knowledge management, and intellectual capital. Dr. Barrett has worked in both the private and public education sectors and in private industry, and has more than 20 years in teaching. And he has spoken extensively at various international conferences in Europe, South America, and Asia on many topics related to higher learning, including artificial intelligence and many other topics. Dr. Barrett, the microphone is yours. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Linda. Let me get started here. We have the topic. Let me dive right into it because there are many facets of artificial intelligence, and it affects many people in both education and business itself. Just a quick overview. In 1980, artificial intelligence became a popular, trendy term. It was at the end of the 1980s when I started working in artificial intelligence at the University of Maryland, College Park. Little did I know that later on I would be eventually working in this area quite a bit. We saw a lot of it start to pop up during the time of the pandemic. That is going to be a theme that's going to be woven into today's discussion because we cannot forget what has happened to the world and to the world of business and education when the pandemic did hit. So it's all about connections itself. What would we do? For example, if you look at the problem with the airline industry recently, when the software, everything went crazy and haywire, what happened? Planes did not go through. I was watching on TV various airlines that were shut down. One of them, the airport in Madrid, where I'm going to be going to very shortly because I'm speaking in Berlin and also in Barcelona in the next coming days on the topic of artificial intelligence. So I'm worried about CrowdStrike if we're going to have another problem with this. There's a lot of investigations going on with the airlines. Some airlines like Delta, there was a problem here. So technology is a big connection here. And we've got to remember, artificial intelligence is only as good as what we make it and how we use it itself. So one of the key things besides technology changing are our educators changing themselves. And we also need to look at policies. In the area of diversity and disability, we need to take a look at our education, legal, economic, publishing world, and social economic levels. During the pandemic, we found people that were not connected to the internet. Why? Because they couldn't afford it. The infrastructure wasn't there. So there have been a lot of discussions and changes that needed to be made. Some companies did open up their wallets and they did provide some free internet, but things are changing. People have revamped going back to work, but now they're deciding maybe that's not what we really need to do. So planning is a start. Let me give you an example. Back in 1998, when I started my case study, I did the first case study in the United States on best disability employment practices. It was with a large banking institution on the East Coast, and they had 500 jobs. 500 jobs that they could not fill. People were not applying for the jobs. They needed another workforce. They got an idea through one of the managers that worked with the Business Leadership Network, which was connected also because I did work with the Business Leadership Network, and I also did it with the President's Committee on Employment with People with Disabilities. I met with them several times during my dissertation. And the EEOC, because they did work on best disability employment practices. So this group at the bank, what they did was they started a pilot program. They got brought in, I think it was 7 to 9 people with various disabilities. They would train them to work in the call center with the caveat that they would only be training, and then they would send the equipment to their house and they would start working from home. This is how I got started in the field of online learning and planning ahead of time. Because, as I would say right here, can we plan enough? No. Who's involved? What are the big questions? You need to be asking these all the time. The beauty of this, what came out of my dissertation, was I was able to work with people that were quadriplegic, paraplegic, people with vision impairments, and mentally challenged, but they were all qualified at the end of the 3-month training period to work from home. As a result of that, that became a model program for the state of Virginia. And then it became a national model. And they saw where they could start to employ more people working from home, people with disabilities. So it had a lot of benefits for both the business and for the disability community. So one of the things with technology that we have to think of are the 3 C's: creation, chaos, or crisis. Yes, no matter what type of technology we bring in here, if you look at the electronic version there and the regular hand itself touching the brain is very powerful. And what we've produced from it with our technology and our logic and everything, it can be beneficial, it can be chaotic, or we can have a crisis. So we need to have a lot of discussions when we're thinking about bringing in artificial intelligence into the classroom and with the different type of stakeholders. Keep in mind, the stakeholders are very important. People with disabilities, people without disabilities, and how do we connect them together? That's a key thing. Also, multitasking is a big culprit. Oh, this is one I'm guilty of. I think everybody's guilty of. You'll have your iPhone on or Android. You've got the 1 or 2 computers going at the same time. You got a TV going at the same time. And you're going back and forth with emails from various places. It can become much. With a person that has disability, especially with limited brain, let's say if they've had a TBI, traumatic brain injury. I've had students that I have worked with that have had TBI, that it can be quite challenging if you do not know how to work with the student. Let me add that in. One of the biggest problems with the ADA, and I actually know the people that worked on the ADA to draft it because they were in DC where I was studying to finish my degrees. One of the big downfalls is that when they do what we call the letter of accommodation, they send it to the professor. Now, let me step back for a second. Most professors come into a learning environment with at least 18 graduate credits in their field in order to teach on the different levels, undergrad, graduate, or doctorate. The problem is a majority of teachers do not have educational backgrounds. I mean, they have not taken educational principles, theories, methodologies, strategies as such as some education majors. For myself, I'm called a master teacher. I'm brought into organizations because I have a dual degree area where I've worked in. I've taken all the business courses, I've taken the education courses, so I can blend them together. And that's why I went into human resource development, which is a combination of education, training development, and career development. Most people do not understand what is the difference between education and training development. They think it's the same. It's not. Education is when you're learning something new, like a new language, a new discipline or program. Training development is when you're updating a skill or enhancing a skill, such as learning a new piece of software on something that you're using similar. Let's say a new LMS system because you've worked on an LMS, which is a learning management system. such as Brightspace, Canvas, Educator, Blackboard, Moodle, Angel, WebCT. I've worked on every single one of those. And it does take time. And when you work enough with it, you can understand why some people may be a little bit slower in learning things. So you got to think about the process. Always think about the process when you're teaching itself. And one of the key things we have to keep in mind, like I said, I looked at that dissertation case area where we had 500 workers that we needed. They were thinking ahead of time. Actually, they should be commended. They knew what to do and how to immobilize their workforce in case of chaos, which we saw with the pandemic. So the AI workforce is a big area where we need to be going towards. Remember, at the end of the day, students are coming to us for either a few courses for leisure or for academic pursuits or for a career pathway. In order to do that, we have to think about what do they get, as they would say, the WIIFM, what's in it for me syndrome, as I call it. We all think that way. Why am I doing this? What will I get? What will I go? Why should I go to a conference? Why should I write a paper? Why should I take a class? How's it going to benefit me? So we have to think a little bit like that for our students. What's in it for them in this process? Also, socialization. Let me tell you, one of the hardest things is when you break your leg and you can't attend a live class, when there were no online classes. I had one student, I do remember the dean calling me on a Sunday. The student fell off the ladder and broke his back the week before. They called me up at the last minute. He had 2 weeks left in a 15-week course, and he needed it in order to graduate. The problem was he was a C student. He was attending live classes. He never took an online class before. They called me up immediately. Can you help this student? Well, it was a classical modern logic class. I said, can he get onto a keyboard? Can you show him how to get onto the email? Yes, we can do that. His wife's very good at that. Fine, I can do it. By the time I got done, he also had a learning disability, which I discovered. Nobody else noticed it right away. I did discover it. I was able to work with him, and he got an A- for the course. The problem was you had to approach it a different way. And with AI, we're able to approach things a little bit differently. And this is going to have a lot of impact on the education sector and the business sector itself. How so? In education, it's not so easy training people with technology if they're not used to it, or if they're forced into it, like we saw with the pandemic. Same way with the business. I spent numerous phone calls and emails with people that did not want to work from home, but they had no choice. The pandemic put them in a position you either work from home or you had no job. So I spent a lot of hand holding, tissue box holding, giving them, letting them cry it out and everything, but they did learn how to embrace it. And at the end of the pandemic, when I thought, well, this is over with, I'm not going to have to do all these phone calls, the phone calls doubled. Why did they double? They doubled because everybody was calling me to find out how could I help them develop a strategy so they could stay at home and work, because they didn't want to go back to work. They didn't want the drive. They liked being with their family. They liked some me time. They like to be able to control their schedule a little bit. So that became one of my big pro bono projects for most people. Now, while we're not robots, technology does help us with many different things. The problem that what we have found with technology, it can be a little bit overwhelming for people at times, especially if they're forced to do it. For a person with disabilities that's not used to certain types of technology, it can be very overwhelming itself. UNESCO is the education arm of the United Nations. I'm not sure whether everybody has worked with them. I highly recommend UNESCO to everyone. I have been working with them for years. I do a lot of the work in their Asian office in Bangkok, speaking at the conferences there. I cannot praise their work for what they've done for education throughout the world. One of their big things on social contract for education, which is a big study that they did, They wanted to unite the collective endeavors and provide knowledge and innovation needed to shape a better world anchored in social, economic, and environmental justice. Now, this was back in 2021. Now, with the input of, or the elephant in the room, as I would say, the artificial intelligence now they've got to address another thing, just like they did with the Commonwealth of Learning, the COL. That's another group that I highly praise. I did a lot of work with them. They're one of the big groups that did a lot of work in the area of mobile learning with mobile phones for people that could not get a regular PC or get online otherwise. So they did a lot of great work with them. I've done speaking engagements with them, and I highly praise the Commonwealth of Learning. And I'm going to just skip a few things. One thing is unlearning. During this whole time of the pandemic, we've had to unlearn things, unlearn how we do things, unlearn how things are done. Don't get attached to one way is the right way is the only way. We need to remember with Hedberg and other great writers what they said. We need to focus on unlearning certain things and relearn other things. A good example, here's a disability to share with everyone to think about. For some of us with multi-generations in our courses and everything, we need to remember one key thing. We have to remember that accidents happen, life happens, strokes and heart attacks happen. For example, a stroke. I had a high school teacher that had a stroke. She was out. She was my English lit teacher. And the one reason why I'm in college, because of her input and her mentoring with me to get me into college. She had a stroke and she had to, depending on where the stroke is, which side of the brain, she had to learn how to walk. She had to learn how to talk. She had to relearn how to write. She came back to work too early. And guess what happened? She had another stroke. Now, this is a woman that was very strong, who also had a child that had severe epilepsy. And she would even come in some days with her hand bruised, bitten, and everything. I mean, when you deal with a child with epilepsy, with a petite mal or grand mal, which is the most severe type, we learned a lot from her. That's how my disability training started there, my interest in the area of disability. And what happens is, because she had that extra stroke, she had to relearn how to write again itself. So sometimes we have to rethink, how do we do things? When I started out with artificial intelligence back in 1987, I had to learn a whole different way of doing programming on a computer in order to teach elementary children at that time with a course I was taking. It was completely a different way from the way I learned computer programming, but I had to unlearn one way in order to embrace the new way. So those are things that we need to consider. So during the pandemic, a lot of people were affected, especially children and adults that had disabilities that needed that one-on-one, but rather, as you see on the screen, which is kind of poor, I'm sorry. So many people were on screens. I've been on conferences where 300 people have been on, 800 people have been on, and you cannot see the faces, you cannot connect. So that human connection was kind of hard at that time. But teachers, for example, I did a speech with a group overseas that I do a lot of work with. And one group was a group of Albanian teachers. When they were hit with the pandemic, they were given 1 day of training on their new LMS. Their courses hadn't been migrated over. They had to create their courses. They were completely lost. I was sitting in the background after giving the keynote speech, and I overheard what happened. And I said, may I join in? And I gave them examples, things, activities, discussion boards, how to put up their quizzes, how to do something, because they told me what the LMS was and I knew enough about it. I gave them step-by-step, like an hour workshop right on the spot. And that meant so much to them. And little did I know, just last year, I ran into the Albanian teachers. They were at the next conference, the live conference. So we got to speak back and forth. The one thing was what they missed was that one-on-one, and especially with people with disabilities, they need that sometimes, that one-on-one for reassurance, confidence, and that extra educational push itself. I'm going to skip through a few of these slides. During the pandemic, we had people like Deloitte that had the challenge, and they challenged different places in Africa, India, Asia Pacific to come up with different ways on how to do artificial intelligence, how to bring it into it. Gates with Microsoft, they've done work with the disability and everything to add into it. You have a lot of big corporations that will give money into it. But the problem is you've got to think about the policy, where the money is going. Are they going for the general good of the overall organization? Or do you have things that are earmarked? This is where we as professors sometimes have to do grants in order to get extra money and technology into our classroom. So we've gone from this during the pandemic where there were empty offices, but guess what? Some people do not. I still teach classes with students that do not want to go back into the classroom itself. If you have a disability, let me give you an example. Under the ADA, everybody thought the world was going to change. It was going to be wonderful. Actually, the ADA is after the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, in which President Richard Nixon vetoed a section of it where it was supposed to take care of the entire American public. He vetoed the section for the entire population and only approved it for the federal sector. So people with disabilities in the private sector and around were not protected from 1973 to 1990. However, there were plenty of lawsuits. So when the ADA came into effect, many times when they go into effect, you have to have things that are codified that have been in the courts in order to put it and to challenge different things. Guess what? There were so many lawsuits that were in effect that were processed at that time, went through the courts from 73 to 1990, that it reinforced the 1990 Act, Americans with Disabilities Act right away. People didn't realize that actually what Nixon did backfired, and people were strong enough to make these lawsuits happen, which in time helped the 1990 Act. So as the exodus, let me go back, as the exodus left, there was a stronger need for leadership. One of the things that we saw with students with disabilities and adults with disabilities, let me clarify that, is that we needed a stronger IT influence, stronger leadership influence, and stronger academic influence, especially with professors itself. No matter where you were located, disabilities are everywhere. Whether you're in South America, I work a lot with a leader there. I just found out she actually went to my alma mater, and George Washington University, where she was doing her master's, I was doing my doctorate. Here we are. We meet decades later in Peru at my other home in Lima, and we find out that we have something in common. We went to the same university. She ran one of the big workshops or area management for people with disabilities, developmental disabilities. So whether you're in there or you're in Europe, because there's so many programs. I deal with the group called Eden. I know Anne Heelan. I've worked with them and spoke with them in Copenhagen and also in Thailand. I do a lot of work there. No matter where you're at, there's still a need for more technology to help people with disabilities itself. For example, here's a good one. Take a look at the hand. Okay, the robotic hand that has to learn how to use impulses to type. But what do you do if that person doesn't have certain digits they're missing? I used to be a typing teacher. That was what I was, a licensed typing teacher for high schools and young adults. I would teach people that were missing digits, missing a hand, limited mobility where their arms couldn't move out and type the way that you normally would teach typing. So I teach them other keys, just like if they were missing a finger, I would overcompensate with other keys in order to get the speed. I had one student whose arms were to the side who could not type like a regular student. Believe it or not, in 5 months, she was typing 50 words a minute with 3 errors. I got her there. She didn't think it would happen, but it does happen if you have the drive. And especially libraries. Look at this, the wheelchair. If any of you have ever been in a wheelchair, have you tried to reach up to a shelf? That's a problem. Now with technology, we don't have to do that as much. We could do the online libraries. That's a great way. But we've got to make sure we have the library resources. Just because we have online libraries, that does not mean we have the resources. So you need to be an advocate for online learning as well as for disability rights in order to make sure that the resources are available. Here's another thing. Disability requires knowledge, excuse me, and understanding by our faculty. For example, these three things, some of us can relate. I can relate because I can sign because I went to Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. And also I went to the Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind, where I did some work. I learned how to do Braille. The Brailler I'm not so good in. I can do it using a Braille template that you open up and you put the paper in and you close it and you punch. It's 6 cells to every 6 dots to every cell. The absence or present. That's how you can read, but you have to do the complete opposite because you have to remove the paper and the dots are on the other side. Some people don't quite understand what it's like to be blind. So sometimes I have to give workshops to other people so they can understand what it's like with a disability and what to expect. Being a diabetic type 2 myself, I run the risk of losing my eyesight. So I wanted to make sure that I knew Braille ahead of time. I know that we have readers. One of the problems with IT and education is they don't think out completely. Just because you say that your website is completely accessible does not mean all components are. And let me finish up here towards the end on post-traumatic stress disorder. I came up with a new term about the aftermath, which I spoke out in 2023 at two key conferences. I suggest that we need a diagnostic name for the stress stigmatization that many experienced during the time before and after the pandemic, which is known as post-traumatic stress disorder adjustment disorder. The problem being most people that had this problem could not get the help, could not get online, and the teachers weren't there. And when you go through PTSD, it can be in many different forms. Let me repeat, many different forms. And as a result of that, not everybody understands it. You do not have to be in war to suffer from it. It could be like a murder attempt. It could be a rape. It could be a very traumatic event itself, and it doesn't go away right away. And sometimes there's an adjustment period, and it can last for years. I actually met a Vietnam vet at a higher learning educational organization that was based for disabilities. He wasn't diagnosed in almost 2.5 decades later. He had it, he just wasn't properly diagnosed. And in the military, they only give you, I think it's 5 or 6 questions to diagnose you. How can you do that in 5 or 6 questions? That's something you have to think about. Same way with us, with our students. How are we diagnosing our students in order to do what they should be doing to understand what's going on and how can they adjust to the disability? One of the key problems, like I said earlier, with the accommodation letter, when we get that, we're told our students can do, they receive extra time for assignments. They may receive extra time for discussions, or they may be exempt, which that I have a problem with. I do not exempt my students because they have a disability. I want to include them with it. I had one student that could not participate in a group project and to present. Guess what? We found some artificial intelligence where we could type everything in and use a synthesized voice and everything. And she was able to participate along with the team and she got the A along with the team. It's possible, but you have to keep on trying. I usually spend between 1 to 3 hours every day looking at different artificial intelligence tools, different packages. I do a lot of trial packages just to find out what's out there, what's going on. There's problems with a lot of the things that are happening out there. People don't understand what a hallucination is. And decades ago, when we went to school, hallucinations meant a lot of different things. Today, it may be because of ChatGPT, because if you have a cheap model, one that you're not paying for, you may have a paper that pops up. You pop it into your screen. I have students that will send me a paper. Half of it was Course Hero, which is a big no-no. And the other half is ChatGPT, which they don't understand. In the background, there's a dot matrix box. I can tell right away what it is. Also, with Turnitin.com, many schools have the AI turned on, so you can take a look at that. And so that's when we have to have a discussion on what we need to do. And what I like to do with ChatGPT with any class is sit down with them. Let's talk through it. Let's see what's good, what's bad, and let me show you how to use it as a brainstorming device, not to write your paper, but a brainstorming, mental mapping, like you did in let's say elementary school, where you learn how to diagram a sentence. This is a subject, this is a verb, this is the object, or this is the direct object. You learn how to branch it out, just like you do in programming. If you do this, if yes, no, you move on. Beginning, if I taught computer programming here, like I did years ago, I would teach it with flow charts. Same way here, we're going to give it basic, what we call prompt engineering. Now, there's a lot of people out there saying that they want new graduates that have prompt engineering. There are some saying, no, we do not want that out there. We want people to have AI. We don't want people with AI. What I want is a student that has a balance that can do both, that know how to write a good prompt engineering phrasing, like a search, like advanced search, and be able to narrow it down. And I want them to see what's being held, what's being produced, to read it and do research from that. I don't want them to depend on AI, ChatGPT completely. I want that only as in the case of what I call writer's block. We all get it. We don't know what to do with it. But at that point, we really have to think, what can we do for the student? What about the student that has, they're mentally challenged. They're not sure what to do. We may make it into a game like. We may try a little, I would try some phrasing. I'll say, why don't you try this and see what comes up with the results? Then email me back a potential outline that we can walk it through. So that's important for me. And finally, it's time to address policy. What needs to be addressed is AI and its components created for the proper usage. Are students being impacted by AI, such as our students with disability? One problem that I have seen in organizations, and I've been called into several, actually, I'm working with a new college in Brussels, Belgium right now. I'm on their committee and I'm helping them. They're AI driven, where they're getting students from all over the world to come in and work. But one of the questions I have in the background, but what are you going to do with students with disability? Well, we haven't thought about that. I said, you need to start thinking about that because you're in the EU, and under the EU, there are certain guidelines and rules. And they came back to me and they said, yes, you're right. There are there. I said, yes, I can tell you the groups, who to get in contact with, who are the key players. That's a good thing. As a faculty member, you may want to reach out to your disability service officer and you may want to ask, are there any outside people that I can work with, organizations? Maybe they have some programs I can take advantage of that might be able to help me out, or maybe I can have some guest speakers in here. So that's a key thing that I think we need to think about. And with that in mind, I'm going to stop right there. And if you have any questions, go right ahead. I just wanted to give you a background, a good background, and what to consider with artificial intelligence and students or learners with disabilities in today's classroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barrett. Are there any questions? If you do, you could put them in the chats. We have a few minutes.
Linda, there's currently only one question in the Q&A, and it's about whether the slides can be shared.
I don't know. What do you mean by shared? Are the slides available, Daniel, from the conference?
It's up to Bob, whether you would want to share your slides with the audience.
Is it possible that you can have him email me directly?
Yeah, so everybody, anyone who's interested in the slides, feel free to reach out to Dr. Barrett directly. But perhaps you can put in your email in the chat.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you, Bob. I have a question. You have provided a lot of really good information about the challenges that AI can be really advantageous for to meet accommodations for disabilities in education. What do you see as a couple of the top advantages for using AI for accommodating? Because there are several. What would be your top go-to usages?
Communication verbalization for the students that are blind. One of the key problems that we've had for decades, I will tell you over and over, are the screen readers. They were horrible. Screen readers that could not even attempt to read many of the web pages. That was a big problem. It has improved quite a bit. Students that have verbalization problems. For example, since I did go to a deaf and hard of hearing university, Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., they cater to not only deaf, hard of hearing, and also blind and deaf and hard of hearing. Students that want to do verbalization, when I actually worked with, who was it? One of the ladies at the Lighthouse for the Blind who adopted two deaf boys. One wanted to stay with ASL, American Sign Language. One wanted to learn to verbalize. So they learned the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet, where you put a finger in front of your mouth and you gauge by the way that you say words, the amount of pressure that goes onto your finger. That's one way of teaching it. But for some people, it's very difficult and to understand some people. And like the student I had in the group setting, she had one of her vocal cords were cut. So it's very hard for her to talk. I actually have a receptionist where my one doctor's office has the same thing. You have to listen, but she can verbalize. But it was so much easier for me to learn to find this AI program. I found another one for her that she never tried. She was able to type something in close to her voice range. They were able to modify it, and she was able to participate with a normal voice. But then that comes into play of acceptance. Some people think, well, I don't want to sound like other people. I want to sound like myself. So that's another thing as a teacher, we have to accommodate itself. And also visualization. For example, what do you do when you're teaching something such as graphic arts and you have a student that's colorblind? How will you teach that with artificial intelligence? Think about it. How are they going to be able to distinguish the difference between a red and a green, a purple and an orange, a yellow and a white? So there may be other clues or things that we can get a special program that will pop up on a side chart to tell them what it is. It may be they didn't develop color blindness until later, or they were born that way. So there's accommodations that you need to make. And the big thing that I tell people, get in with the disability organizations. I belong to the National Association for the Deaf. I also belong for the National Federation for the Blind. I go back and forth to their monthly updates, well, weekly updates now, and they give me all the latest IA technology. That's how I keep up to date with it. So those are some of the challenges that you need to think about.
All right, here's another question. Is there any one AI product out there that you think will be a game changer for those with learning disabilities or executive functioning challenges?
That one I'd have to research more. The only reason is it's changing so quickly every single day. For example, ChatGPT is something that changes every single day. Disability software, anything that we've seen developed over the years, it's been slow in the making because you haven't been able to get the resources or capital in order to invest into the programs. What I would do again is contact local organizations that actually work with that. I would also contact schools that specialize with students with certain types of learning disabilities. They can be a wealth of knowledge to get a hold of. And there's a lot of clearinghouses out there that will give you recommendations right away and sometimes give you free membership or free trial periods in order to try out the software.
Okay, one last question. I have heard that AI detectors can sometimes flag the work of students who have had to learn or relearn English or have writing disabilities. That's a really good question. Is there any research on this or a way policy can be done to protect these students who get flagged?
Can you read that one more time?
Sure. The person asking the question says, I have heard that AI detectors can sometimes flag the work of students who have had to learn or relearn English or have writing disabilities. So in other words, it's a stylistic way they're writing, I think is the point. And is there any research or policy that can be looked into to protect these students from being, I guess, accused of using AI because of how they write?
That's a difficult one because one that could be like you're targeting the student itself. It could be that the administration doesn't quite understand the technology itself. For example, Turnitin.com, when AI came out, many schools would not use it. They would not use the detector because they found a lot of problems with itself. Students, when English is a second language, is another issue. When I have students that come into the classroom, what I do is an extra protection for the student and for myself. I make sure I send them personal emails back and forth, and especially in the discussion. And I'm going to watch how they write certain things. I did this when I was a department chair, when I was hiring professors. I would make sure they would send me things back and forth so I could learn their writing style, how they write. Then when the students turn out something that's completely way above what I've seen in an email, and granted, we do write a little bit more informal with emails, that will trigger a red flag for me to say, hey, I need to take another look at this itself. And it could be that the student, as I had with those student that used Course Hero and used AI was used completely except for one sentence at the end. He argued over and over that he was told that as long as he used the prompt to find the information on ChatGPT, that was his. I had to have a little conversation with him to make it a learning moment so he knew right away, no, that's not how that works. Those are the works of others. And we need to credit the source, but we need to do a little bit more original writing itself. So this may be a case-by-case basis. And also the administration, they need an education in this because they may not be willing to write a policy or to protect the students like we should be protecting that may have English as a second language, have a learning disability itself. Also, I want to know, where is that information going? Is it going into a database that I have to worry about later for my students? People don't think about that. What you type in and what you erase off an email, it doesn't disappear. It's always there. So those are considerations that we need to think about.
Those are excellent points, Bob. I think we've reached our time. Am I right, Daniel?
That's correct.
Okay. We have to be very mindful of our time because of other presentations coming up. Dr. Barrett, thank you so much. And to all of our attendees, thank you for coming to the presentation. We appreciate Bob's presentation. Please email Bob for a copy of his work, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.